Good afternoon. Thank you, GIPC. Thank you, Dr. Agarwal. Thank you, Chair, my dear friend Pinaki, and my esteemed panelists. When we talk about intellectual property, we definitely talk about intellectual property rights. And when we talk about intellectual property rights, we talk about the implementation of the laws, and then comes the enforcement of the laws. But quite often, what we miss is the policies that actually drive those intellectual property rights and make it possible for business as well as for, for innovators, including the business, to make sure that the intellectual property is meaningful. For that reason, we need to make sure that the policies that the government publishes, they are in line and they are abiding with the statutory intent. The statute provides certain directions or certain sort of guidelines that need to be followed. And then, obviously, they are enforced once the rules are framed in India. Specifically, that's the process. But it is the government which comes in and shows the policy directions where the stakeholders, all stakeholders, whether the government or the others, they follow. And the policies become significantly important. But typically for lawyers, quite often they miss out to look at the policies. They miss out the maneuverability that is available through the policy space. Let me introduce myself. Thank you for the introduction that Pinaki has given. I am a lawyer. I specialize in international trade laws, intellectual property laws, and policy laws, in the sense policy practice, in the sense legislative and regulatory policy. I'm a partner with Luthra and Luthra, and I head the practice in this field in the law firm, and definitely have a significant interest in IP industry at large. Now, when we talk about, when we focus on the policy aspects of any law, let's say intellectual property law, you will see that the international governance has oriented towards trade. When the different agreements of the WTO were negotiated, they looked into trade in intellectual property goods and came out finally with the TRIPS agreement. Once those are implemented in different national jurisdictions in their domestic laws, it provides the pathway in which trade in these IP goods would move. So I will touch on few areas where the policy is important and where the policies cannot be static, needs to be dynamic, and that's where you would say that policy is changing, policy has changed, and policy needs to be changed. Obviously, whenever we talk about intellectual property in India, we immediately think about the pharmaceutical sector. And we know in the last 20, 30 years, how things have changed, how policies as well as trade issues have changed the IP policies in this domain, and where after India signed in TRIPS agreement, how we gradually brought in a regime which is very much compliant with the global requirements under the TRIPS agreement. And I'm not going to repeat anything in this field because that's already known to people. There are areas where we need the changes to come and which will benefit the country, as well as, when I say benefit the country, it will benefit the local industry as well as the industry, the MNCs which are coming in. And in general, it will benefit the innovation in the country. We know the government of India's position on Make in India as well as Digital India Drive initiatives. We know that. Now, to make that successful, we definitely need the investments in infrastructure. We need the investments in real terms in technology. When we talk of investments in technology, when we talk of technology coming in from outside, there obviously needs to be protection. And as I said, that Indian IP laws are in compliance with the TRIPS agreement. But technologies are not one size fits all. Technologies are in different sectors are different. Technologies for the pharma sector is different from the technology in the energy sector, in the renewable sector, in the automotive sector, in the ICT sector or the information communication technology sector. But because of a strong presence in the pharmaceutical sector, perhaps the drive had always been towards that sector rather than looking at different sectors. Now, when we are talking about Digital India, Make in India, and the possibility of bringing in meaningful local manufacturing, meaningful technology transfer, we also need to understand that the present legal framework and the policy framework might not be suitable to cater to all the requirements in the ICT sector. For example, when the technology transfer takes place, not necessarily patents would be the best to protect the entire technology, the gamut that's coming in. So what is the situation with trade secrets? We do have trade secrets protection through common law, but I think there are significant sort of gaps that need to be taken care of in this area, and perhaps it is time for us to look into possibility of statutory protection of trade secrets. I believe that the government is looking into it, but I also would like to point out that the business and the innovators locally also need to understand how that would benefit their interests. I feel that it would benefit the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, as well as those who are playing in a larger scale. It would not be the typical problems that we see that local are disadvantaged. It is not going to be in that arena. So this is one area where changes are required. This is one area that changes need to be very carefully looking at the problems that are existent now and would be possibly would be in future. This assessment is to be done and then addressed as quick as possible. That's one area. Then when we are looking at the area of clean technologies, we usually immediately, what I've seen, what I've learned from different positions in the climate change conferences, which I was privileged to attend quite a number of times. So what I've seen that there is a tendency to feel that technology technology-related businesses in the other sectors, perhaps the pharmaceutical sector, and how it has developed might be the most appropriate approach for the energy sector also, in the renewable sector also. So that might need to be revised and looked at more closely and carefully, because the business model and the IP models followed are completely different. So even if there is possibility of using certain checks and balance measures like compulsory licensing in pharmaceutical, that might not be necessarily of any use in the environment sector, where the investments are significant in areas where things are moving, whether it is solar, whether it is wind turbines, whether it is algae-based fuel or whatever. So there also we need to look at differentiation. These are the two sectors I wanted to highlight. But there may be other sectors. I see that there's a crowd. I presume it is mixed. So I will leave at these two sectors at this point, but would be happy to take in comments and take it forward so that we have an engaged discussion. Thank you very much.